It's a revolution.
Greetings, citizens living under a fascist state. British aerospace Orbi wield zero national loyalty like the US Lockheed Martin selling to any buyers. B is deep into bribing Saudi officials to sell them jets to go with the B cluster bombs bombing Red Cross in Yemen.
The BAE secured prostitutes, provided luxury hotels and cars for Saudi royals, and indeed paid millions, if not billions of pounds into Swiss bank accounts belonging to Saudi royals.
After being dropped from an aircraft, cluster bombs open in mid-air and drop hundreds of bomblets over an area as large as a football field, causing immense destruction. The bomblets, also known as submunitions, sometimes fail to explode on impact and become a danger to civilian populations.
The same characteristic bribing can be seen in other countries like Romania to accept to be Navy, or the US overpriced joint deals with Lockheed Martin like the F-35. But the most heinous example of increasing patronage through bribing is that to dictators like Pinochet to supply the war to create weapons demand. B in Norway cannot collect pensions as the government refuses to bankroll human rights violating weapons. To lesser developed countries, B sells weapons at ridiculous markups.
The issue here that is being discussed behind these doors is the issue of how Tanzania is going to be paid their money. As you might know, the story of Tanzania and BAE is a very long story.
Like NATO, B is owned and operated by the dreaded Atlantic Council. B protesters in Europe are surveilled by private security companies like the Snowden famous Carlyle Group owned Booz Allen Hamilton. Booz Allen, being a private and not government firm, gives no fucks about which country or company it works for. And because Booz Allen is elite Carlyle Group owned, they take steps to surveil and thwart democratic protest movements against class division.
As Jerry mentioned, the Carlyle Group, we're headquartered here in Washington, D.C. It's a global private equity merchant bank, and we probably do more leveraged buyout and venture capital investing related to defense and dual-use technology than any other private equity firm in the world.
Many people think that Snowden worked for the NSA, not a company contracted by the NSA that does not have even the light government regulations of the NSA.
Even if you're not doing anything wrong, you're being watched and recorded, to where it's getting to the point you don't have to have done anything wrong. You simply have to eventually fall under suspicion from somebody, even by a wrong call.
Through Snowden and the HBGary anonymous hack, Booz Allen is well known.
Participants have been concerned about recent FBI raids, and companies such as HBGary Federal Lurking and Logging are chats.
Though certainly with members like Woosley and Clapper, US intelligence is running private intelligence firms,
facilitating them with an advanced database system, capable of storing biometric details of travelers, often without consent of their own nationals.
Another Booz Allen director is Ian Brzezinski, the son of trilateral and technocracy creator Dr. Evil himself. Has been used Brzezinski and has worked with the dreaded David Rockefeller. Ian has moved the base of surveillance operations now in the public eye of Booz Allen to his own Booz Allen clone called the Brzezinski Group. Ian, who looks like a James Bond villain, is doing everything he can with his NATO-controlling Atlantic Council to engage Russia in war, including arming the shit out of the Ukraine. The Atlantic Council is backed by the Rockefeller brothers fund and Soros. Soros and many Bilderbergs are also in the Carlyle Group, which also runs United Defense and Freescale Semiconductor, whose 4 Chinese patent holders were killed in Malaysian Flight 370, leaving Lord Jacob Rothschild the sole owner. In fact, the Carlyle Group is surrounded by instances denoting false flag fuckery. They have hands in diligence, the ISIS oil laundering intelligence agency. And on September 11, 2001, Carlyle member George Bush Sr. was hosting the Bin Laden family as guests of honor.
On September the 11th, 2001, Carlyle were holding their annual investors dinner in Washington, D.C. In attendance was James Baker, Frank Carlucci and George Bush Sr., who left on the morning of the attacks. Also in attendance was a man by the name of Shafiq bin Laden, the half-brother of Osama bin Laden. And it was just 6 days later that George Bush Jr., the current president, would name Osama bin Laden as the prime suspect.
There's an old poster out west, as I recall, that said, "Wanted, dead or alive."
Morgan Stanley had 2,700 people working in the World Trade Center, enough to account for all the casualties. But strangely, only 13 employees were inside and killed. Of course, Morgan Stanley is sinister enough to be among the corporate members of the CFR. The only stranger number perhaps was the 3 floors filled with Lehman Brothers employees only had one die. The Lehman Brothers of course are gone now, except for a whiskey that claims to be the taste of failure. The Wall Street companies ate each other in 2008, hence Lehman and Bear Stearns, who basically were running elaborate Ponzi schemes anyway.
Work for the last 2 years. It's crazy, I can't even get a job waiting tables. Oh, you know what though? I would fucking murder those Lehman Brothers if I could. Yeah, I hear ya.
But it is from this bank of evil that came the creators of Blackstone.
Well, this week Halliburton is making headlines again, unsurprisingly, for getting away with more criminality. See, the company recently pled guilty to the destruction of evidence related to the 2010 Deepwater Horizon explosion that caused one of the largest oil spills in history.
Lehman with sister Blackstone Corporation, BlackRock operators Satan's checkbook for outfits like Halliburton. Which is hardly surprising considering that Lehman got its start profiting on disaster capitalism during the Depression. Bear and Stern went the same way as Lehman, crashing from their doctored stock price of $100 a share to pennies within a few days. Screwing many while the CEO pulled out $50 million and split.
And I think it's a terrible thing. These people should go to jail, as far as I'm concerned, and they should be prosecuted like any other person that's done wrong.
Jamie Dimon, the CEO of Chase, helped break Bear Stearns while taking over Washington Mutual and has been huge voice in deregulation. Sexist and mansplaining even when speaking to Elizabeth Warren, who despite being another con artist politician was a Harvard bankruptcy lawyer, and understanding banksters is well within her wheelhouse. Of course, this motherfucker is in the Council of Foreign Relations. And, meanwhile, Chase actively invests in Bitcoin. Jamie does his best to discredit Bitcoin to the public to drop the market value for investment.
After you managed to lose $3 billion in just a matter of weeks, does this make you change your view at all on all of the cheerleading that you've done to fight against regulation and to weaken regulations? Do you think
they were busted for rigging the energy markets? We all know they rigged the silver market. Jamie Dimon is completely busted in this lie. So, well...
Meanwhile, when banksters in the CFR spin-off the Atlantic Council are not surveilling and thwarting populist democracy groups. The Atlantic Council works on creating false flags with such bluntness as to employ video game creators like Dave Anthony of Call of Duty to help wag the dog false flags to control the national attention.
While working on Call of Duty, Dave and his teams spend countless hours thinking about future warfare, about technology, and the types of capabilities that would be involved in military conflict in the future.
So Dave, as you know, I'm looking into the future of warfare. What's keeping you up at night when it comes to national security?
The enemy now is everywhere, and it could be anyone.
Although it also employs the old guard, so you'll see Kissinger and Scowcroft preempting talks by such as Hillary Clinton.
I greatly appreciate the remarks of of gender Scowcroft. Anyone who worked for me or with me for any length of time, who finds it in his heart to say generous things after that, is a man of truly spiritual qualities.
Which is exactly where you would expect them to be, considering the Atlantic Council operates not only for Wall Street's worst but the marketing arm of the military-industrial complex.
Membership of the Atlantic Council includes some of the top defense corporations in the country: Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Northrop Grumman, and Raytheon. So why are the top defense corporations in the world advising our lawmakers on foreign policy? As we know, the revolving door between government and corporations never stops spinning. OpenSecrets.org found that in 2006, 151 members of Congress had up to $200 million of their personal assets invested in defense companies. Having that much financial stake in companies that make money by having the U.S. go to war begs the question: are stakeholders concerned about ending the war? Or are they trying to make sure there's perpetual war for them to profit from?
Such as the Atlantic Council and the Asia Society are spin-offs from the Trilateral Commission that came from CFR and the Bilderbergs. Someone you will find in all these mentioned groups is Schwarzman. Schwarzman means black and accounts with Peter. That means stone, the name derivation of Blackstone and BlackRock. Schwarzman has paid for naming on major educational sites, almost as a fuck you, while he has defunded and shut down libraries and education for the poor. For the nefarious purpose of increasing his geo-prison population, he is heavily invested in. Aside from fucking workers out of jobs while playing disaster capitalism with companies much like Bain Capital. 37% of Blackstone's $111 billion is pilfered pension funds turned to risk capital, and whether they win or lose on the investment that gambles the retirement of the many, they keep 20% as administrative fees. While fucking the poor, Stefan Schwarzman also has the audacity to suggest the billionaire class are the persecuted ones, paralleling with Jews in Nazi Germany. And like many multinational CEOs like this one who got his start at Lehman Brothers, he cares nothing for American business, having sold a majority stake of Blackstone to China.
Well, what's the China dream? Sounds a lot like the American dream.
Exactly the kind of asshole enlisted for the Trump American Manufacturing Group, where he through Blackstone funds terrorism while building up Saudi infrastructure.
$20 billion anchor investment from the Public Investment Fund of Saudi Arabia. Bugle will invest in the enhancement of U.S. infrastructure assets, whatever that means. King, okay? Saudi King Salman and President Trump. If you listen to those speeches, oh my goodness.
Schwarzman is also behind SeaWorld and explaining away cruelties there.
She had gone from one side of the pool and committed suicide by bringing herself and blowing her brain onto the concrete.
Orcas cannot thrive in theme parks. It cannot work.
Schwarzman is a member of the Skull and Bones.
As is customary with all our new members, you now have to spend 7 minutes in the closet with our most senior member.
We've already mentioned that the Skull and Bones headquarters is known as the Tomb, but is what actually goes on down there in the depths all that dark and mysterious?
That sounds kinda cruel.
No, you'll love it, it's great.
Well, it's been said that the initiation rituals for potential bonesmen can include some very bizarre, occult-inspired trappings.
The initiates have to do things like drink fake blood out of a skull.
One former Yale student turned journalist for the New York Observer even managed to capture on videotape one of the Skull and Bones rituals for neophyte pledges to the society. These rituals include a mock human sacrifice, the kissing of a skull, and various embarrassingly juvenile taunts from elder bonesmen to these neophytes.
Schwarzman is also on the Business Council, on the board of Chastened with the 1% at the World Economic Forum. Meanwhile, BlackRock Investments is now left to Vimx Pharmaceuticals. Larry Fink, considered the most powerful secret on Wall Street, the man behind the curtain. and another compatriot on the Council on Foreign Relations, which used to be called the Society of the Elite. Larry Fink got his start creating the kind of mortgage-backed securities whose manufactured fuckery crashed the economy in 2008 and will cause an even larger crash in Canada presently.
The potential housing bubble that many have predicted is going to hit Canada's economy pretty much like a tsunami, very similar to the housing crisis and the mortgage crisis that impacted the United States economy so in such a devastating way in 2007 and 2008.
BlackRock now is the largest shadow bank, and with largest venture capitalists Carlyle Group become shadow government.
The crash of Wall Street and people rioting on Wall Street and around the country. This could trigger the so-called shadow government from emerging from the shadows.
BlackRock is behind the Dakota Pipeline and other bad corporations like Halliburton, Schwarzman's Geo-Private Prisms, and Goldman Sachs. The biggest BlackRock-backed contributor to the Dakota Pipeline is Wells Fargo.
It's a beautiful day here in front of Wells Fargo. We encourage you to come down and join us. We're in Midtown, New York City to protest the, obviously the Dakota Access Pipeline. And as usual, it's a spirited crowd.
We don't want you long, take your broke bank home.
Wells Fargo absorbed the drug money laundering Wachovia.
What do you mean conflict?
Well, because the people that were running this business, which is called correspondent banking, in other words, handling all these transfers and charging fees, they're compensated for volumes of business.
Okay.
And so when the compliance people said, hey, you should close these accounts, we were suspicious, my impression was that they were thinking more about their bonuses and not really thinking hard about what was going on.
Right. They were thinking that they were going to make a lot of money, though, out of the transfer of this cash.
Exactly.
Wells Fargo is not very concerned about legality as they demonstrate charging people for unneeded car insurance.
70 car loan customers who may have been harmed, so that's $500,000, who may have been harmed by being forced to buy auto insurance they did not need.
They are engaging in racketeering.
Examples of racketeering activity include extortion, money laundering, loan sharking, obstruction of justice, and bribery.
And insider trading.
It's illegal to use insider information to profit from potential stock changes. This disadvantages public stockholders and betrays investor trust.
Wells Fargo is also majority owned by Warren Buffett and seen as too big to jail.
For willfully defrauding America with bunk loans over 7 years. So for the jail part, there is none. None. Zero. Nil. Exactly no one will go to jail for this. Just the quick fine and that's it. They're off the hook.
They'd probably be treated alright if they did go to jail, considering their majority stakes in geo-private prisons. They commit lending fraud on a mass computer-driven scale.
The bank giant Wells Fargo slapped with a major lawsuit accused of unlawful and fraudulent behavior. Says Wells Fargo has generated a virtual fee generating machine. That's pretty amazing. Right. Although, let me finish here, through which its customers are harmed, its employees take the blame, and Wells Fargo reaps the profit.
But they don't need computers to do it for them. Wells Fargo has tricked tons of people into default or bankruptcy.
Being instructed to default by Wells Fargo Bank that I wouldn't be considered of having a legitimate hardship unless I defaulted on my home loan. It sounded insane. Yet, when they tell you that and you're so desperate to keep your home and to get a fair, negotiable mortgage, you agree that, okay, I guess that would legitimize to them that I'm really struggling. And it was true, but I gave up my health insurance in order to pay the mortgage. I gave up other credit card bills in order to pay my mortgage.
Louisiana said that Wells Fargo's behavior during 5 years of litigation with one single homeowner was, in her words, highly reprehensible.
And gives special attention to screwing over minorities.
Wells Fargo, Ms. Jacobs has said in interviews with the New York Times, saw the black community as fertile ground for subprime mortgages, as working class blacks were hungry to be part of the nation's homegrown mania. Loan officer, she said, in an affidavit, stated that employees referred to blacks as mud people and to subprime lending as ghetto loans. I can't tell you how hard it is for me to even say that.
Wells Fargo also commits bizarre levels of identity theft.
Investigation found that at least 1.5 million bogus accounts and over 500,000 credit cards had been opened since 2011 without customers' knowledge. The fraud was committed as a means of not only making more money for the bank, but more importantly to boost sales figures so that employees involved could reach quotas and qualify for incentive bonuses.
A perfect fit for a guy like Buffett who goes out of his way to fuck over anybody shooting for a clean world.
Green energy advocates are expressing increasing frustration with Buffett, whose sprawling business empire is opposing them on many fronts. The friction is evident in Nevada, where a Buffett-owned power utility, NV Energy, is fighting to hike the costs for residents to use rooftop solar panel.
And let us remind you, on September 11th, 2001, Warren Buffett took his favorite World Trade Center X6 to a golf party at Strategic Air Command, the members of which missed the hijackers that day because they were told there would be hijacking drills. Dig into the docs and be aware of those pulling your strings. We will not forgive. We will not forget. Expect us.